Good overnight, and welcome on in to the overnight edition of From Day One. Art Bell and Michael Heiser are here to rock us out in Dominion with the rest of Open Line Calls. So without further ado, let's begin.
You've got control of them now, I hope. You're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Roswell Art. This is a very interesting subject that I think that everybody contemplates at some point. My question is, and it pertains to something that I've seen when I was younger. I've seen a creature that was obviously not human, but did possess obvious technology that was not introduced to us until much later years. But what I
want to know exactly what you saw. Was this a humanoid type creature or what?
This was a humanoid lizard type person I was within 4 feet of it. I lived in the Midwest. In the 1970s, we had no air conditioning units. You left your windows open in the summer times. Being a kid, the storm windows that you have, to keep the bugs out, mine was busted out from basketball, so it was just basically an open window. I was sitting in bed. I've always been a very light sleeper, and I found myself sitting up, and I was watching the back of a creature that was obviously lizard-type creature. This creature, I was fascinated, but as a kid, I don't think being a kid, you get scared at just observing things. I observed this thing in fascination. This thing turned around and looked at me. I looked right at its eyes, and I didn't see eyes. What I seen were what looked like glass bulbs that had a red tinge around the very edge of it, such as what you would see maybe as nighttime vision. That's hypothetical to me because I don't have that in my possession. Never had that in my possession. It's not evidence other than what I look back on and review it.
All right. You said you were a kid. How old were you?
I was 11 years old.
11 years old, and you were not asleep.
I was not asleep. I was sitting up in my bed observing this as it was going through the items that I had on my dresser. And when this thing turned around and looked at me, it probably looked at me for what seemed like a long time, but in reality was probably 2 to 3 seconds. Now, this is where people think that, and they laugh at me, that it's hokey pokey. This thing took its hand, which did have fingers. I don't recall how many fingers it had, and they weren't like dexterous fingers like human fingers. It was actually like animal-type fingers, and it touched a yellow belt that it was wearing, and I watched this thing disappear. Okay? Now, I don't know how much time had passed, but I then, regained a consciousness. My closet door was open, and this same creature was rummaging around in my closet. I was still not panicked because it was moving slow. This thing did turn and observe me. It was observing my condition of me observing it. Once it observed that I had seen it again, this thing moved so fast that it was like a strobe light, and it leaped right out that open window. And that's when I panicked. As a kid, I panicked when it moved fast. When it didn't move fast, I was able to observe it with fascination. I then screamed, ran to my parents' room. My parents came, opened, turned on the light, looked around. My closet door was obviously open. Things had been strewn out of it and whatever. I slept in my parents' room. They didn't believe me. Then the next morning, I checked on everything that I could find, that might be disturbed in my room. Earlier that day, in the 1970s, the elderly people that lived next door to me, they had a yard sale, and I bought a huge Rand McNally dictionary for $1. That's the only thing I could find that was missing from my room. Besides, there was a mess that I hadn't made.
All right. Well, what do you think you encountered? Do you think you encountered something demonic or something alien?
No, I don't think I encountered something demonic, and I don't necessarily think I experienced anything that was extraterrestrial because I didn't see any kind of a flying object or anything, but I did see.
Okay, well, let me rephrase it. What do you think you did encounter?
I think I encountered that some sort of secretive subculture that had technology that observes or was trying to learn more about us and gathering information. And here's what happened. The very next night, I waited for this thing. I sat up all night waiting for this thing to come through my window with a baseball bat. I know it sounds crazy.
We're short on time here, so did it come in or not?
No, but the third night,
No.
I was getting a drink of Kool-Aid, and I seen my mother had a plant that had toothpicks in it. It was a potato plant sitting in the windowsill in the kitchen. I was drinking Kool-Aid, and I seen the hand come up and lift that thing up out of that, and I looked out, I peeked out, and I got scared because of the previous experience.
Yes.
And I seen this thing packing this thing into a cardboard box. This thing then picked that cardboard box up, looked at me now for the second time that it had seen me. Our garage was detached. This thing took about 4 steps and leaped up on the top of our garage and walked off towards the back where I couldn't see it. I couldn't wait until the next morning to get out there and climb up on top of the garage to see if there was some sort of fort, a nest, or anything. There was no evidence. There was nothing.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like you drank the Kool-Aid, all right. Mike,
Art, that ain't right.
Yeah, I know, but people have these encounters.
Sure. Absolutely.
He described a creature that was lizard-like.
Mm-hmm.
Into what category, pray tell, would you put that?
Well, the not shocking answer is I don't know what the guy saw. I mean, I could take up the time and go through the 4 or 5 different categories of people who've studied abduction research and the so-called old hag and the night terrors and all this stuff and come up with categories that this could go into. But ultimately, I don't know what the guy saw.
Mike, does your philosophy allow for demons? Demonic entities?
Yeah, I believe in a non-material. Since I'm a theist, I'm not a materialist. I believe in the so-called, for lack of a better term, spiritual world. Non-human intelligences that are disembodied and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to say something. This might be a little controversial here.
Well, you're controversial. I mean, in what you believe and demand evidence for versus what you have faith in and don't. Okay, go ahead.
If this happened to somebody that I knew personally, we had a good relationship, the first thing I would want to know was, were you living near a military installation or do you have near relatives in the military? Now, the reason it's controversial is, as I will confess, I have been influenced by the work of people like Leah Haley, who believe a lot of this stuff, the whole MyLab thing. For somebody like her who was deeply entrenched in abduction research and this sort of stuff, for her to take the position she does now and for the reason she does, that would be really, really, really on the forefront of my mind. Again, if this happened to me or somebody that I particularly knew, but ultimately the honest answer is I don't really know what the guy saw. I think there could be interdimensional realities, spiritual realities. I mean, it's all vocabulary we have to use for this non-material world. Again, I'm not a materialist, so I believe these things could exist. But if you're going to put it in the extraterrestrial category, I'd like to first know that there are such biological entities as opposed to some other description, non-biological description.
Okay. All right. Let's see. You are on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello.
Hello, Art.
Yes.
Hey, Roswell, first-time caller.
Hey.
I'm this west from northern Michigan right now. I just wanted to ask your guest what his ideas, his thoughts are on other dimensions, higher dimensions, and which is something that really cannot be proved, actually. And if he does believe in a God, does he or does he not believe if it's like a multi-dimensional being, which in itself means that it cannot be proved?
All right, let's start with the dimensions. Theoretical physics right now thinks there may be 11. What do you think?
I don't see any reason to deny that there would be, more than all these dimensions. I mean, the caller's right. I mean, you can't necessarily prove these things. Again, they're postulates, and there are ways you can sort of attack the problem that make it more or less coherent. But I mean, I don't see anything problematic about it. I mean, who ultimately knows? If there is a God, that deity could by definition exist outside our time and space and intrude upon our time and space, come and go, all that sort of thing. I don't have any problem with those suggestions by the world of physics, theoretical physics.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're very welcome. Take care. Or God could exist across all of those dimensions.
Sure. I mean, we don't know.
Okay, not first time, what am I about? You're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello. One number, many people.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello? Hi. My question... Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. My question is this, and kudos, Rockwell, and hello, Mike. This stuff is going on in the Middle East. Does that make the Christianity, Muslim fighting a moot point? That the Bible really doesn't matter much other than a directional? And my other, in addition to that, do you think that...
Okay, hold on for the answer to that question. I'm not sure I got it straight. Mike?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what caller's asking either.
Right, okay. Again, please, what are you asking about the Middle East?
Well, with the Muslims and all their fighting, and they're saying that they have to beat the Christians, and this, does it really, I mean, where does that fall into theology and the God image and the whole ball of wax? Is that a moot point? Is it useless? I mean, is it just something they're taking to extreme for no reason?
I'm not sure I'm getting it still.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. Again, I'm not quite sure either. If the question is all this stuff in the Middle East now about Bible prophecy, I'm one that would say no. I don't really see a real one-to-one connection there. If it's something bigger than that, there's fighting and there's wars, and I mean, Jesus did talk about that this is going to go on and on and on. Well, then there's that connection, but I'm not quite sure what she's asking beyond that.
Yeah, it's more or less in that ball right there, what you had just said, the answer. My other thing was to do with creation. Is do you think that with our higher intellect that is basically, not to be rude, but you could take a redneck and try to explain something to them, and they're not getting it. Whereas you could take a scholar, and it's the most simplest thing to them. Do you think that our intellect allows us to see these other dimensions and things that other people wouldn't comprehend?
Yeah, I don't see how someone's grasp of this or that piece of content, in other words, their intelligence, I don't see any correlation to that being some sort of gateway to, seeing other dimensions. So I guess that's the best way I can answer that.
Okay, very good. You are on the air with Mike Heiser. Now you're on the air, I think. Hello.
Hey, this is Tunzi.
Hi there.
I had a question about the UFOs. Well, 1/3 of the angels fell with Satan. Could the UFOs be manifestations of the angels? Because they're not leaving sonic booms, they're not leaving vapor trails or anything. So could it be just a manifestation that they have projecting onto us as a way to deceive us from God? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm just waiting to see if you were done.
Oh yeah.
Well, this will open up a can of worms here. First, I don't actually believe that there's any passage in the Bible that says 1/3 of the angels fell with Satan. That comes from Revelation 12, but the comment about the third of the stars is actually in connection with the first coming of Jesus. So it's not. the whole idea of an angelic rebellion, as far as the Bible goes, I think is something of a myth. So you can tell I'll get some good email out of that one.
Oh, I'm sure you will.
I mean, I do believe that there are angels and demons and all this kind of stuff. I just don't believe that particular thing. But let's just set that to the side. The whole thing about UFOs and angels, to me, when we talk about UFOs, we're talking about craft. Talking about entities that are humanoid. Angels in the Bible are always depicted in human appearance, which is quite different than these craft. They don't need craft. Again, if this is an interdimensional reality, you don't need nuts and bolts technology to carry you from one place to another. If you have command over dimensional passage, you don't need to get into anything that's going to burn fuel to get you there.
All right. Let's see. You're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Got me?
I got you.
Hey, this is Billy. How y'all doing today?
Fine, Billy.
Good. I got a couple questions. I got a point to make. And first of all, you've read that we're all over the page here. First we got a creator, which is the Lord, right? Okay. So you need a biological point. Oh, let's just say here, if a alien kidnapped us was dissecting us, would you think that he would need a biological point too? Everything is molecular. They're made up by molecular. And if you have a creator, the creator made the molecular use for it. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, Mike. Mike. If you're breathing into the phone.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. Go ahead, Mike.
This is why I'm a dualist.
I raise my two to the point.
Go ahead.
Then I'll leave you alone here. Okay. With the African American that was talking earlier. Now, if you read in the Bible, then when they had Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel, right? Well, the Lord came to Cain and he put a mark on his body, and he said that he will be recognized from now on with this mark. Now, did you believe that's where black people came from? But also, when he sent them out in different tribes, remember when he had the land of Babel? Okay, he sent them all out in different tribes. Now, that's how we get separation of racists, not racist, racist.
All right, can I interject there?
Sure.
Okay. No, I don't believe that the Cain and Abel story has anything to do with black people, okay, with the African American race or the Negro race. There are no physical characteristics attached to any of the tribes or nations in the table of nations in Genesis 10. Up until the 20th century, okay, well, late 19th century, let's be generous here, race was defined in terms of language and religion, and that's the way it always was in the Bible. You defined a person's race by what language they spoke and what God they worshipped. That was separated. Okay, those things were severed to make a biological argument by, believe it or not, the Nazis. Okay, early Nazi thinking, because of their wish to identify a particular biological set of characteristics with what they perceive to be an original race. So again, the Bible doesn't reason that way because they didn't know anything about science. They're not doing biology. Nowadays we go by genetic lineage and differentiation. We're more sophisticated than they were in the 19th century, and certainly in real primitive times, the second millennium BC or something like that. So I think a lot of this racial theory, this racial talk that people try to attach to the Bible, like I told the African American caller, is really misguided, and it's really contrary to the biblical world.
Yes. Well, but when they split them up into the different tribes, when the Moses walked around, they split them all up, different tribes. Then they brought, then they had the land of Babel, which was, I hope I can get pulled over.
Well, if you go back and look at the table of nations, they're not all those names are not actually people. Some of them are locations, some of them are tribal groups. Some of them are geographical regions and things like that. So, again, I would suggest that it's because of a very careless reading. Again, this goes back to the late 19th century of passages like Babel that we get a lot of the racism that we've been living through in the 20th century and still in the 21st century. And the Bible just doesn't think on those terms because it wasn't about physical characteristic. It was about language and about, again, which part of divine turf are you on and what God do you worship and that sort of thing. So my view of these passages is really linked to the biblical world itself and not, what Christians or Jews or Aryans or whoever, Europeans, did with the Bible in later times.
Okay. What do you think about you were saying you were needing a biological proof. What biological proof would it take for you to gain your faith and to believe?
Well, this is an excellent question.
Yes.
And I'm going to have to be a little careful here because it actually takes me into sequel territory. I'm almost done with the sequel to The Facade, which is called The Portent.
Yeah.
So I'll try not to dance too badly here. But let me say it this way. It would be sufficient to me to either have something microbial, the elements of which could not come from Earth. In other words, non-terrestrial, clearly non-terrestrial elements. Something that's microbial or bigger that had to go by the same set of criteria and non-terrestrial stuff. Now, the problem is, if you know what synthetic biology is, and if your listeners are interested in this or want to find out about it, look at the book called Regenesis. It's by the guy who teaches genetics at Harvard. Synthetic biology means not only can we read DNA, but we can write it from the atomic level on up. And what that means is that in our near future, 10, 20, 30 years out, we will be actually able to create DNA that has never existed before and cannot exist on Earth. Now, if you have someone that can do that, they can actually fake best evidence. And that's the problem. Again, since I read a lot of this weird stuff, this weird technology stuff, it's a little scary because since I'm into ufology, I take the whole paranoia of the military-industrial complex pretty seriously. I'm suspicious of it. I'm suspicious of the black world. And if they're talking about this at Harvard, I know they're talking about it at other places. And so it's a little frightening for me. So I'm being honest with you. That would do it for me. But in the back of my mind, I'd still be wondering, okay, is this real? Or did somebody make it to create a narrative?
Almost like a genetic Photoshop.
It's even worse. Look, nowadays we think of what you could do, Art. If you have the ability to write your own DNA, you just make it up. Mm-hmm. And now marry that to 3D printers, that idea, again, that piece of technology. I mean, it's really frightening. It is just honest to goodness frightening that if someone wanted to, they could do that kind of thing to move people towards certain sets of beliefs that would put them in situations where their behavior was predictable to steer them in certain directions.
Yeah, I wonder what you're going to do then, Mike. I'm serious. What are you going to do then? When somebody can come forth with a creature that they have, in essence, created, mm-hmm. and they're going to present it to you, and you're going to have biological evidence in front of your eyes. Then what?
This is why I write fiction. Because I want to confront myself with that problem. The honest answer is I don't know. I would sort of be predisposed to thinking, okay, this is probably real. I'm probably being too paranoid, again, to think that someone would have this kind of power and would want to wield it for God only knows what purpose again. But I'm just telling you, maybe I've been in ufology too long, but I just have this strong, again, suspicion that, if I can think these thoughts, people who are a lot smarter than me can think these thoughts too.
Okay.
And it's kind of a dilemma.
All right. Hello there. You're on the air with Mike Heiser.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. How you doing, Art?
Fine.
I love your show. Your show is so wonderful and inspiring. I have a real great question for,
Mike Heiser.
Hi, Mike Heiser. Yes. You have just explained a whole lot of things that would basically a belief in God. I get to the first part when I started holding here is you were saying that there was a DNA struggle between science and theology created from Adam and Eve. It couldn't be done with just a couple, and then it went to Moses, and they had 4 sets. But it doesn't explain the fact that we have discovered in the past cavemen, Cro-Magnons, Neanderthals that pre-existed Adam and Eve with their DNA.
Why would we assume that they pre-existed Adam and Eve?
Because they're going back millions and millions of years ago.
And why would we presume that Adam and Eve couldn't as well?
Well, that's where I'm not a theologist or a PhD or a scholar or anything like that.
You don't need to be.
But I'm just listening to you, and you're saying just now here recently of someone being able to write a DNA. I keep listening to this show, and I look up in the stars and all the vast universe and all the stars and billions upon trillions. And it's like infinity up there, and you have to be pretty naive to think that we were the only little speck in the infinite world that there life exists as we know it. I would assume that there was something somewhere in some faraway galaxy or whatever. How come they haven't reached that technology that they can write DNA and say, oops, made a mistake, I'm going to throw it over here on this rock, let it grow, and see what happens. So in the way you're describing it to me is there's not God. He just created us. So who is he? Who created him? Someone did the same thing to them and threw them on a rock and let them grow? I don't understand. Well, that could go home.
What you're doing is you're taking points of data, you're taking specific ideas, and you are connecting them again, which is a normal impulse. But the question is that connection coherent? Is it compelling? Is it the only connection that can be made? The answer to all 3 of those is no, no, and no. So I wouldn't be too disturbed over the fact that you can think those connections. That doesn't make them real. I certainly would not say that because we can do something now that somebody did before back in Adam and Eve. I have no basis to make that sort of statement, and nobody else does either. Okay, all we're describing is, to be really, really blunt about it, and I think, based on other guests that Art has had now and in the past, we're going to get ourselves in a whole lot of trouble because we seem to be hurtling toward this, fulfilling this impulse, which isn't a good one. That is to be as gods. And, that's what frightens me. It's not the idea that we can do this and now I'm going to project that back into the remote past and that must be why we're here. And my concern is really the here and now, that we are at this point where we're entertaining some of these thoughts. And again, I am not predisposed to thinking that people in power who have these technologies are only thinking about wonderful ways to use them.
Mike, does it scare you to hear what people embrace and believe these days?
Boy, that's probably your most loaded question of the night. Yeah. I mean, it does. And part of the reason it does is not necessarily the conclusion. I mean, that, this person's a theist, this person's not, this person's a Christian, this person's not. What really frightens me, and, the way you ask that question, is that people often believe things, and the path that they take to get there makes absolutely no sense at all. In other words, they don't check for evidence. They don't test. They don't probe this connection to that connection. They just move to the next connection. People seem to be, and I think part of this is the information explosion. There's so much out there, and it's so wearying to think that I have to think about all this stuff. So there's this propensity to sort of just take a narrative and I like it and I'm going to go with it, and that's where I'm at. So it's this unexamined, unprobed sets of ideas that just sort of get jumbled together and people come out somewhere on the other end. Because if that's the way you're thinking, you can be led to believe almost anything.
All right, stay right where you are, and we'll be right back. This is Dark Matter. Mike Heiser is my guest. I'm Art Bell. Great to be with you this evening. What do you believe? Isn't it fascinating? We live in an incredible information age, and maybe we're beginning to morph into a situation where all beliefs sort of get mixed up and, I don't know, mixed together and ingested, and then somehow or another settled on, and it all comes through the internet. What do you think, Mike?
That's the scariest thing you've said all night, Art. Man, it's really scary. It really is, because there's no filter, and you marry that to the real suspicion of authority, that this generation, that's growing up with the internet has.
It's not all their fault. It's not all the internet's fault. Authority began to go out the window with Richard Nixon.
That's true. That's true. We are living, unfortunately, we're living on the very bad capital of a lack of leadership, a lack of ethics, a lack of trustworthiness, and you marry that to access to lots of information, and I don't really care to have you help me sift it. I'm going to do it myself, and it's just a free-for-all. It really is.
I remember when I was 13 or 14, Mike, you could go to the TV, and one day the news would come on, and a guy from the FBI would come to the podium, and he would tell you this or that, and it was like gold. I mean, everybody just flat believed it. If the FBI said it, hey, baby, it was true. Today, the exact opposite is true. If some sort of government official, by the way, the government did close, by government, if some government official comes to the mic and says something, people almost automatically disbelieve it.
Yeah. To use a biblical phrase, we are reaping what we have sown.
Apparently. You're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
I have a question for Dr. Heiser.
Mm-hmm.
This is Josh in Utah. Have you ever considered the possibility that some UFOs might be from ancient civilizations, considering the things that were built back then?
Mike thinks about that all the time. He thinks, right?
I would say not on the basis of things that are built. A lot of people really don't. Again, I know it's boring. Okay, I'll admit that, but a lot of people don't really spend the time to read the high-level, dense, detailed stuff, by specialists like in ancient engineering and technology that, are put out in what we call in academia the fugitive literature that only people in the guild are going to read. But I do read a lot of that stuff, and I don't think we need aliens to explain the pyramids and Baalbek and all these sorts of things. But having said that, I thought you were going to go with the time travel with the question. And again,
I mean, time travel might be possible, but there's other theories out there.
I mean, let's say that science, physicists at some point were able to, really nail this down. It was possible, not only possible, but, we know it can be done. And then the question comes, well, did somebody else figure this out, do it? I mean, it's a different kind of question, but I actually think that's worth more time thinking about than stuff like the Ancient Alien View puts out. I mean, to me, that there's more of a rational basis for that, assuming we ever get that point of knowledge that it's real.
The only thing that bothers me about you, Mike, is that you seem to have one standard of proof for anything alien, whether contemporary or ancient, and another standard of proof for anything that is biblical or involves creation or the creator.
Oh, I don't think so. I think you can actually. I think I'm actually pretty simple. I proceed from some really simple assumptions.
Oh, you dance well, Mike. You dance well.
No, I'm trying to be honest. I'm trying to let your listeners understand the way I think.
I'm trying to be honest too.
Right.
I'm trying to be. I'm just giving you my observation.
Right, and that's fine. You know, for a biological entity, I need biological proof, and God isn't a biological entity. I don't think we can prove God, so we're left to, philosophical arguments. What's more coherent as opposed to what isn't. So again, I don't have blind faith.
All right, you're on there with
faith to be reasonable.
With the man who doesn't have blind faith. Hello.
Hello, gentlemen.
Yes.
Well, we segued off in the DNA, and I wish I'm going to be a little bit vague because I don't remember the professor that wrote this book, but he wrote a book for college on chemical evolution. And as I understood him, he said for a while that was like the given textbook used to explain chemical evolution across the country. And then one of his students challenged him or brought up a question as to where does information come from? Where does the information that's in the DNA actually evolve from? Mm-hmm. And I guess I'd be interested just in your thoughts on that, Art, your thoughts on that. And then I think he was saying, for life to exist, it takes DNA. For initial life to exist, it takes DNA to as a blueprint to build life. And so prior to life, what would be the precursor to DNA that would even, I guess, where would the DNA come from? And again, as complex and as sophisticated as it appears to be, I mean, this is a blueprint tied up in, a microscopic piece of biology. And this challenged this professor's belief that evolution, life could exist without a creator. But when the student got him thinking about that, it got him rethinking as to evolution and origins. And I do apologize, I don't recall this professor's name. It's been about a year since I looked at his material.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a design argument, and in fairness to the people who don't accept intelligent design, they would more or less say, well, we know all about that particular argument, and that before you have DNA, you have to have elements, and they have to come together to form DNA as we know it. But they will attribute that to, again, even though it looks designed, they'll attribute it to a process that does not have a creator behind it. And that's sort of illustrative of where the argument's at. It is, first of all, do we have design? We're looking at this and we think it's design because, holy cow, it's incredibly complex. Is this design or is it random? And at that point, it becomes a philosophical argument. Which one makes more sense? That's what I mean by these philosophical arguments. Which one just makes more sense? Which one's more coherent? You'll find people on both sides of that, which is why we have a debate over intelligent design.
That's right. Okay, you're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. I guess I come from a very different kind of thinking. I'm from continental philosophy schools, like Jacques Derrida and some of the deconstructionist thinkers. So I guess I'm approaching all of your notions a little differently. But I guess I have a little problem with the point you made where you said you're disturbed by the fact that people's path to belief makes no sense at all. It seems to me that by its very definition is that. So, if you have faith in something, that's a path to belief that makes no sense. You are taking a leap.
I would agree. I would agree if the path is full of unreasonable conclusions and arguments.
Well, let me make an argument about time then. From some of the thinkers that I read, the notion of time itself requires a kind of relational thinking, where the present moment is a relation of past to future. So the now is never available to us immediately. which means that presence itself is a problem. The sovereign subject, the person that's in control of, thinking itself. If you're a dualist thinker, you're holding on to the idea that there is a sovereign subject that is present in the now, and I would argue that that's a kind of irrational thinking.
Well, I would say that the fact that we cannot come to grips or cannot explain that now is one thing. As far as that being the taking that inability and drawing a conclusion from it, like you've just drawn, I don't know that that's necessarily coherent. It seems like an argument from our inability. But I mean, someone who, and I'm not saying I take this position, this whole God outside of time thing, which has some significant problems, which you're probably already aware of. But it also has, its adherents, within cosmology and philosophical theology, that the arguments sort of aren't really relevant to a being such as that. And so the path that you've taken to demonstrate that this being is in this moment that doesn't exist, that moment wouldn't exist in our dimension, if we can use that term, whereas it would not be relevant in a different dimension. I mean, there's any number of, again, I'm not saying I'm married to any of these positions, but I'm trying to illustrate for the audience that there are other ways to take the same set of ideas and wind up somewhere else.
I guess I would argue that thinking itself occurring within this kind of time, any notion that there's something outside of that, if you're arguing for like a God that exists outside of time, is unthinkable and in some sense nihilistic, because it's opposed to life, which occurs within time, and that's the way we experience it. So wanting something outside of time is in a sense a kind of nihilism or denial of life.
And I would agree that that's a good argument against it. I don't argue that God is outside of time. I would argue that God can be in our time, or he cannot be. I mean, in other words,
but if God's in our time, this is a radically different God than a traditional Christian God. Now we're talking about
it might be radically different than the Christian thinkers you're thinking of or accustomed to. But I'll give you an example, and it gets really, you sound like the guy that would enjoy this sort of reading. If you go up to William Lane Craig's homepage, he spends a lot of his career, frankly, on this God and time sort of thing, showing that, hey, it's really kind of theologically scary to have God completely outside of time. And one of the arguments is just exactly what you said. Another one would be, if God exists out of time, then how can he really empathize with our experience? And that has implications for things like prayer and whatnot. So a lot of Christian theologians are not where you're putting them.
What makes you think he has anything to do with our experience at a macro level anyway?
Again, that's just a theological statement, and you can approach it two ways. You could say, well, the Bible says that, and that would be one argument. The other way to look at it is reasoning from the analogy of ourselves, and that is, well, if I would have made things, it seems more reasonable that if I made something, I'd like to at least watch it, if not spend time with it, as opposed to not. And so again, that's where the philosophical argument lands, and that's the ground on which it's fought.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the conversation.
You bet. Me too.
Take care. Here's somebody, Shep, who says, Mike says that a lot of people's path to belief makes no sense. But faith is itself, by definition, a path to belief that does not make sense. Isn't his fundamentalism caught up in the same problem?
Well, first, I'm not a fundamentalist. The people who fired me from my last teaching job would certainly say I'm not. So I'm not in that camp. And I think that's the same question that the previous caller just asked.
That's right. That's
I mean, basically, yeah, it's true. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's true that not all beliefs are equally coherent. Not all paths to a certain conclusion are equally coherent. I don't think that's really going out too far on a limb. Okay, I can believe that pink bunny rabbits, invaded the Earth millions of years ago. Okay, I believe it. Does that make it coherent? No, it doesn't. They're not all the same.
Okay. You're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello.
Yes. Is this Art Bell?
It is.
Hello, Art Bell. Roswell to you, sir. I'd like to thank you for your services and all the entertainment you gave us over the years.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Michael, Dr. Mike, excuse me. I've got a question. In the Bible, it says that man was created in the image of us. Speaking of God, I guess when he says us, what does he mean by that? I mean, when he says, is there more than one God, or what does it mean when he says a man was created in the image of us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll answer you quickly, but just so that you know, if you go to my website, drmsh.com, go to the quick links and click on the quick link page to click on the word Elohim, and you'll get this answer written out, so you don't have to try to remember it. Let us create humankind in our image. Again, these plurals are well known. They are what's called grammatically the plural of exhortation. If I walk into a room and I say, hey, let's go get pizza, I am a single speaker speaking to a group. This is exactly the same thing that's happening in Genesis. God is speaking to who? Well, I would say the heavenly hosts, the angels, whatever, the inhabitants of the spiritual world, whatever. Says, hey, I have a great idea. Let's make humankind in our image. Now, that plural implies that the image, whatever that is, and I have my own view of that, which you can read about, is shared between God and these other beings, the heavenly hosts, angels, whatever, Elohim, whatever, and humans. There's something shared there. And I think the image is not a quality like sentience or thought or prayer or whatever. I think it's a status. I think it has to do with representation, ruling representation. We are God as though he were here. We are his representatives. It's equally shared. And the angels are God's representatives in whatever domain God gives them, okay? That's the short answer. So I'm a single speaker. I'm speaking to a group. And in the case of Genesis, when the creation actually happens, God created humankind in his image. There's a singular pronoun, and the verb is singular, and the subject is singular. There was only a single creator in Genesis 1, but that creator announces it to a group. And here's where I depart, obviously, from Sitchin, and even in the Mesopotamian text, the Anunnaki, if you actually go and look at the Atrahasis epic, Enuma Elish, the Anunnaki do not create humankind, but they are in the room. They're watching. A single deity does the creation. So there's a relationship there, but not the one that Sitchin is going to argue for or did argue for.
All right. You're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello.
Hey, Art Roswell.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yes.
My name is Mike, too. I guess two Mike Simmons will make it right, huh?
I would agree.
If God created everything, then who or what created God? And I'll take my answer off there. Thanks, Bart.
You're very welcome.
Well, my answer, since I'm a theist and a dualist, is that there was nothing before, God. So again, that's a philosophical position. I don't believe that in the string theory or universes burping other universes into existence answers this question at all. All it does is set up an infinite regress. Well, what about the universe before that one? And what about the one before that one? It doesn't really do anything. So we're back to are we monists or are we dualists? That kind of thing.
I once heard somebody say something that I found fascinating. It was that in the beginning there was God and only God. And that he, in essence, became lonely and so blew himself up. And that was Big Bang. And we are all, therefore, a part of God.
Right. That is
randomly tossing that out there.
Right.
No biological proof for you.
No, I know. That's actually Gnosticism, which doesn't mean it's a bad word. And if you hold that position, Art, here's something for you to wrestle with, because I remember you talking about that and you finding some real, there's an emotional impact, that had with you, that you really like that argument. But if you hold that, you have to be a materialist. In other words, you don't really have a consciousness outside of the material world, because if God is everything and everything is God, there is nothing outside the material creation. And I don't know if you want to go there intellectually. I mean, obviously you can, but I've heard a lot of content on your show that would suggest to me that you do think consciousness is different than the material world. Now, maybe
it may be. I'm open to proof, Mike.
Right.
Definitely
And that's where it has to be.
Hold tight. We're at a break point. Final break. We'll take it right here, and we'll be right back. Mike Heiser is my guest. If you could read my mind, love, what a tale my thoughts could tell. Just like an old-time movie about a ghost promotion. My guest is Mike Heiser, and he's all yours. Anything you want to ask, absolutely fair game. And so, here we go. You're on the air with Mike Heiser. Good morning. Email,
morning, guys.
whatever.
Well, it's morning here.
Morning.
Hey,
yes.
I'm going to try to be pretty concise with my question and hope I don't lose my train of thought on the way. I probably don't believe in God the same way you believe in God, and I definitely don't believe in religion the same way you do. I'm kind of a Taoist in that I think the God you can name is not God. And so my question is kind of a comment. I do believe that I have come in contact with something that is what you would call a higher intelligence, because what I experienced, it manipulated, the physical world that I experience every day in its own way. And I experienced it the same way I would experience you face to face. So I know it's out there. I don't know what it is, but it got me to think that if there is a higher intelligence such as this, wouldn't it be easy for them? If it's not easy, wouldn't it at least be interesting for them to manipulate our world to make them appear godlike? That doesn't mean they are God, but they certainly could appear that way to us. And one of the things that got me thinking on this direction is I have a friend who's certain that he met Jesus in a vision, and he wants to tell everybody about it. I had what you might call a vision, but I'm not going around saying that Jesus or Krishna or any other God came to me. Something I witnessed. I don't know what it was. It opened my eyes up. So how can you trust anything you see? When I listen to you talk, I think the only things certain are death and taxes. Everything else is just the way to go, right?
The old bromide. In answer to your first question, could these higher intelligence appear godlike? I would say yes. So that's a fairly straightforward question. I'm wondering, this is something that you experienced, this higher intelligence. Do you assign personhood to it? Was it a person?
Well, I'll tell you, my grandma and I both saw it, and she believed it may have been my grandfather who died before I was born. We both experienced something paranormal. I just experienced something very strange. It was a light, and it had form, and it was a thing. She experienced a light, but it had a different appearance to her. So her impression, she's a very religious person, by the way. So I was surprised that she didn't come out of it as a religious experience, but she felt that it was her husband, Bob, my grandfather. I got no impression from it other than that it was not of, I can't say it was not of this world, because obviously it was of this world, but it was not something that, performed according to the 9-year-old physics that I knew at the time, and never has. So there's something else out there. I know that. I don't know what it is.
Even though you didn't get an impression.
Right.
I hope you don't mind the conversation here. I'm curious. No. Even though you didn't get an impression, does that rule out a person? In other words, personhood for this thing or whatever it was to you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
In person, in what form? I got the impression that it was intelligent. Absolutely. Did I get the impression that it was human or that it spoke to me in any way? No.
Right.
I just got it would be like maybe a lower form. If we're a lower form of life, it'd be like pulling a fish out of water and saying, "Hey, fish," and that fish would be like, "What are you?" It's another form of life. I will say that. And it was bright white. It was the whitest light I have ever seen, but it was pure white. So you would think it had all the hallmarks of a religious experience, but I did not get, if anything, it made me less religious and more open-minded to the fact that we are not the end-all, be-all.
The reason I ask, and the way I'm thinking about personhood, I should have been clear. I'm talking about things like intelligence, which of course suggests decision-making ability. In other words, it made a decision to occur to you or something like that. And I would say, even though I can't process, that experience because I didn't have it, my own, worldview here, again, these are just thoughts that I'm thinking as I'm listening to you. The fact that this may have had, these personal abilities, that's probably a better way to say it, of course doesn't rule out that there's a higher form that we would call God. And I would agree that this form, whatever it is, could appear godlike. In other words, all these thoughts that could be extracted from this, I would find not threatening, again, to a theistic worldview. And since I accept the theistic worldview and I'm not a materialist, I could look at you and say, hey, I really think you did have this experience. I don't think it was something, flickering in your brain that wasn't working right or whatever, that you actually, could indeed have this. But again, if you and I were, we're friends having a friendly debate, over a cup of coffee or something, I would say, hey, maybe you ought to fit this into a theistic worldview.
Well, let me break a train of thought. But to me, it is a mystical experience. Because I didn't get any religious, I didn't pull anything religious out of it at the time. It still had that effect on my perception of my world as I see it. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you what I saw that defied physics, but I don't expect you to believe it because you were not there. You can't experience it the way I did. And so when I see my friend who had a seriously religious experience, and it has made him a very religious person, I believe him up to a point, but I can never experience what he experienced. All I know is what I learned is that I cannot say anything for certain.
Well, I think you probably could say one thing for certain, that you're not a materialist. I mean, it seems to me that this experience yanked you out of that category.
You're right about that, absolutely.
And I think, again, if we were pals at the coffee house, I would say that's an excellent place to start. And Art, this is a really good segue for your earlier question about UFO stuff.
Yeah.
People are not wasting their time to think, again, I'm referring to what I call serious ufology here. I love going to UFO conferences, and I have colleagues in academia that ask me, what in the world are you doing? What are
do they love you, Mike?
If they're patient enough to hear me out, yes. But I mean, I tell them, look, the people that listen to shows like this, like Dark Matter, and of course Coast to Coast and other shows. I mean, and go to these UFO conferences and are into this. I have found my experience is that they are the most predisposed to having really good big picture question discussions, which ultimately, fall into the religious category. Who are we? Why are we here? Is there a God? All this kind of stuff. And I have found a lot more predilection to really getting into, discussions of some depth in that area, more so than church. I mean, that's just me. I like one of those things for that reason. People really like to talk about this sort of stuff.
Oh, they do. Very quickly, Rick is asking, what are your thoughts on the camp of thinkers that claim there is no free will? We have very little time here.
I disagree. I think if we do not have free will, we cannot image God. That's an attribute we share with Him. That's the shortest answer I can give you.
And a good one, too. Very quickly, you're on the air with Mike Heiser. Hello.
Hey, Roswell's Art. Thanks for having me on. Just a quick question, Doctor. You guys were talking about some frightening beliefs, and one really scary contingent to me is the new Earth Creationist. They think that the planet is 5,000 years old, and they've built a museum to prove it. I just wondered if you could offer some insight on that.
Yeah, are you referring to young Earth Creationists, like recent Earth? Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. I would be in the old Earth camp. Although I have to say I'm not offended by the idea because if God created everything immediate, who am I to say He couldn't do that? But I think we need to take science seriously, and I think a lot of it points to old Earth. And I know there's arguments on both sides, but I would be more predisposed to be in the old Earth camp.
Okay. We're wrapping it up. We're out of time. Mike, I want to thank you for being here. It's been very stimulating and at times confusing, but all in all, a wonderful appearance, and I'm sure we'll have you back again. And your website again is?
drmsh.com. And Art, thank you for having me on, and thank you for coming back.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. It's just a pleasure. What would I do without the stimulation? Be on the couch doing nothing.
Yeah,
all right, my friend. Thank you. Thank you very much, and you have a good night, Mike.
You too.
Bye-bye. Good night. That should have caused a bit of thought. Well, listen, everybody, we are out of time. Thank you very much. Good radio is good radio, but time's up. Later.
And with that, Art Bell is done, so we are as well. As always, please make sure you do like, share, and subscribe. Be kind to one another and release the Krakens as we continually march on here from day one. Have a great night's rest, and we'll see you tomorrow.